Hello, welcome to Hedgehog Naval Academy. Today we're going to start our series learning how to play Black Seas. Now today we're only going to cover the basic rules of movement and gunnery. We're not going to get into all the detailed rules. Those are going to come in further videos. And the reason is we're going to start you off with what you need to know to start playing the game. And then once you get, you've mastered that, then we'll start adding in the other additional rules to really expand the enjoyment you're going to get out of the game and add the depth that the game brings in full. We won't cover all of the advanced rules in this early part of the video series because those are optional and will come later, and really should come in after you've mastered the basic rules. So let's get started and let's take a look at how do we actually sail one of these ships. Alright, so today we're going to learn kind of how to sail using this frigate. Frigate is chosen because as far as gunnery goes, it's got all three types of the main three gun types: cannonades, light cannon, and heavy cannon. Other than that, it sails like every other ship. It's the easiest way to learn. It gives you the most variety in actions, and it's a medium-sized ship, so there's no hitting modifiers when shooting. All right, so that's what we're going to use. But let's start and let's take a look at the turn sequence because we need to understand that before we go any further. So here's the turn sequence laid out by Warlord. You roll for the wind direction, and then you determine the weather gauge order. You activate the ship in that order. You resolve your shooting, you resolve boarding actions, you mark the ship activated, and you basically repeat until the end of every ship is moved. Okay. So we're going to go through those. We're not going to cover boarding actions in this video. That'll be the next lesson. Right now we're going to focus just on how do you sail and how do you basically do the basic gunnery, okay? Alright, so the very first thing we're going to have to comment on, right here we're going to assume all the ships have a regular crew. You can have an inexperienced crew, you can have an experienced crew as well, or veteran crew. But for purposes of learning, let's keep everybody the same. We'll just stick with regular. That'll apply to skill tests, which we'll talk about later. And it'll also, because they're both regular, we're going to have possibly some roll-offs when we need to make decisions about who activates first. Normally, the game always favors the more experienced crew. All right, so let's kind of dive into what's this thing called weather gauge. All right, so this is the chart here that Warlord has. It's on page 8. How do you actually determine what wind change, if any, there is? And it's really simple. You just roll 2d6, and what we do is we have one player each roll a d6 and add it together. 4 through 10, most of the time it doesn't change at all, and any changes are temporary if the speed happens. So if you roll a 2 or a 12, the wind kind of goes either up or down as far as intensity, and so it affects the speed of the ship for that turn, that next turn only. Okay, it goes back to normal unless you roll again a roll 2 or 12. Now, if you roll 3 or 11, that is when the actual wind direction will change, and it'll move one step. So this is the time when, at the beginning of the turn, sometimes you're not facing into the wind at the end of the last turn, but the wind direction changes, and suddenly you're facing into the wind, and it can cause trouble. So we'll see how to handle that in a few steps from now. Okay, wind direction is kind of randomly determined. It's either specified in the scenario or it's rolled randomly for at the start of the scenario and then the start of every turn after that. And so there's 8 points, or 8 directions the wind can come from or be blowing in. Okay, and that corresponds to the 4 main cardinal points of the compass: north, south, east, and west, and then the 4 in betweens: northeast, southeast, southwest, and northwest. Okay, and the particular wind direction is one of those 8, and I'm using this particular mat with all these grid lines on it to kind of help illustrate some of these concepts. It's not a mat from Warlord games, but it does help us illustrate some of these this weather gauge thing. So let's just we'll just pick northeast, okay? Just out of the gate. So let's set up a few ships. We'll pull this back a bit, and we're going to set up some ships here. Remember, the wind is going in this direction, and let me just grab a couple here. Okay, so since the wind is coming from down here from the southwest and it's going northeast, you take a straight edge. It could be a ruler, tape measure, it could be a laser pointer if you want, and you hold it perpendicular to that wind, and then you basically, pull it across the table. Okay, make sure not to hit any ships. The first ship it hits, or the order in which it reaches the ships, is the order they activate. So here, this frigate activates first, this brig second, and then that one last. If instead the weather gauge was maybe, let's say the wind was blowing northwest instead, then it would go this way, and it would reach the brig first. It would reach this frigate first. You're looking for the hull, not the yard arms or bowsprit. You're looking at the hull, and then finally this frigate. Okay, so that's the order in which the ships will activate. Okay, so the only thing that you have to consider is there is a potential that sometimes ships will be like lined up so close that the wind reaches them basically at the same time. You can't really tell which one goes first. So in the case of two ships that look like they're going to activate at the same time, the one with the most experienced crew goes first. If they're both the same, you basically roll off. High roll wins, right? You can use a six-sider. That's the easiest way to do it. All right, so let's now take a look at how do you actually activate the ship. All right, let's go over level of sails again. Now, a ship can be anchored, or it can be at 3 different levels of sail: light, battle, or full sails. Now, you can choose whichever you want to be in, but there's certain restrictions. So let's set this up. I'm going to show you off here on the right hand side of the screen. You'll see here is the wind direction chart and a wind attitude chart, and it shows you in relation to the ship that's sailing what angle does the wind come at the ship, and what does it mean as far as what level of sails it can be. Now, a lot of scenarios start with the ship at battle sails, and battle sails is a pretty good point to be at because it allows you to move more often or less than light sails. We'll go into what the actual levels mean in a second, but we got to figure out what is our maximum allowable here. So it's all based on the wind direction. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to use this weather rose again, and we're going to assume the wind is going northwest. Okay. For that now, okay, I'm going to put the wind chart back up, and we're going to use this turn indicator, the turn gauge, and place it right against the rear of the ship. And then you'll notice the wind is coming in from this angle, right? Okay. If it's coming within this yellow arc, then it's coming directly from the stern, and you'll notice on the wind direction or wind attitude chart, that means that the maximum level of sail can be full sail. Conversely, if the ship was going into the wind like this, again, the wind is coming at this angle and is coming from within that arc. The ship is sailing into the wind. Okay. Now, I'll just set this up real quick. It's going in this direction. Essentially, the ship is sailing into the wind until such a point when that wind is coming in from outside that arc. So there's a pretty big arc in which you're going to be sailing into the wind. And that, if you're in that situation, the most you can be is anchored. You can't be at any other level of sail. Aside from that, between those two extremes, the ship can always be at battle sails. Okay? Alright, so that's the first thing. But now, let's go ahead and we're going to take the windrows off. And let's talk about what happens if you are sailing into the wind. Because this is a problem. Because what the rule states is that you can only ever sail at the maximum allowed by the wind attitude, and you can only change your level of sails by 1 step. So we'll assume battle. From battle, you can go up to full, or down to light, as indicated by your maximum based on the wind. If you're at full, you can either stay there or go down to battle. If you're at light sail, you can go anchored or you can go up to battle, your choice. But you can't go from light to full or full to light or battle to anchor or heck, even full to anchor. You can only change it once, one level, one step. All right, so the reason this is important is that if you're sailing into the wind, you have a choice to make. Because again, you have your winds coming in, you're sailing at battle sails, and the wind is either turned in your direction, or unfortunately, it has, sadly, you maneuver in such a way that now you're facing into the wind, and you're not at light sail. If you have to drop more than 2 levels or more, from battle sails to anchored, or full sails to light sails, or full to anchored, you're going to take more damage, okay? Because you're going into the wind, and the wind is pushing against the sails suddenly in the wrong direction, and it can actually damage the mast of the ship. So if you drop by 2 levels, you're going to potentially could take D3 damage and get a critical hit assigned. Or if you're going from full sails and have to drop to anchored, you might have to, you'll take D6 damage and have a critical hit. But that's the danger. So now there is a way to get out of that. When you're activated and you're facing into the wind, you have a choice. You can either move, if you were moving in the previous turn, you can either move forward 1 of your full rated knots and then go to anchored, taking whatever damage that you're going to get for being, if you have to, because we're at the wrong sail level. Or you can decide to try to tack. And tacking is a nautical term where you're actually sailing just outside the wind direction. So it would be, for example, like here would be tacking because you're just outside of the wind coming in this direction here. I'm going to use this to illustrate. Okay. Or conversely this way. Again, just outside. Okay. So that's tacking, sailing just really close, as close to the wind of the direction as you could, or could possibly with the ship's design. Now, what this allows you to do is, if you basically make a skill test. Now, a skill test, here's the little chart. You see a regular crew is successful on a 5 or 6, veteran a 4, 5, or 6, inexperienced just on a 6. If you're successful with this roll, then you are allowed to immediately, before you decide your level of sails, you can immediately, remember here's the angle, the wind's coming at that direction, you can immediately turn the ship the minimum distance to get it out of the line. So if you're going right into the wind, you can go either direction. But let's say you're shifting just off a wind, right, like this. The shortest distance of turn would cause you to go, you'd have to turn this way. Now, to turn a ship, you'll put the stern marker here, and you'll swing the bow. That's how you do it in the game. So what you'll want to do is try to figure out how far do you need to turn. Okay, and that means, so you can set this up. I'm coming within the wind. In order to get out of the wind, I need to turn that far, just a little bit. And so now I can actually use this arrow. I can line up this ruler with it, pull this out of the way, and now place the turn indicator at the back of the ship, and then swing the bow just until it's parallel with that line. And now I've just tacked. Now I can decide whether to go battle, change sails to whatever, go from battle to light or up to full. Now in this case, because I've just gone out of wind, just out of gauge, out of sailing in direct line of the wind, I can now go up, either stay at battle sails or go down to light. I can't go to full yet, but I can make my decision now and then act on that. Okay. Alright, so let's see how you actually move once you've decided that. Okay, so how do you move a ship? This is actually pretty straightforward. Warlord provides these little gauges, movement gauges, and they're very handy. They're not exactly 1 inch apart. Each of these is slightly more than an inch apart, each gradation. But the way it reads in the book is you place this at the very bow of the ship, and then you move forward the rate of knots. So a frigate has a rate of knots equal to 5. Most ships actually have a rate of 5. A couple have 4, a few have 3. And so you essentially always begin your turn. The first thing you do is you move forward. Okay, so whatever direction you ended last turn, that is the direction you are moving forward at the beginning of the next turn. And so you basically just start it at the beginning of the bow, and then move forward the 5, taking your weight counter with you. Okay, and then that's all there is to it. That's how you move. Now, sometimes, the bow of the ship is a little, hard to really discern. Are you measuring to the figurehead, or are you measuring to that point on the thing on the ship? So sometimes what we've done is we actually line the back of the ship's stern and its level sails up with the ruler, and then we move that forward. So it goes 5 like that, and then we reset the ship, and there you go. So that's how you move forward. Now you'll do that once for each level of sails, but between each of those, so we're at battle sails, so there's our first move. Now we can fire if there's something to fire at, and we can also turn using this turn gauge. Remember that our frigate has a red turn angle, so that means we use the red side. If your ship has a yellow turn angle, like the largest ships of the line, first rates and such, and your merchant ships, you'd use the yellow. Okay, but here we use the red. So let me show you how to actually turn. And we're going to take the wake marker out to make it simpler. So here is the ship's in position. You place the turn gauge right up against the stern, so it's touching and even with the stern. Now you can turn the ship in either direction so that it is parallel. The ship is parallel to one of those red lines. You can turn it in any of those, anywhere along there. Now, you only do that once between each moves. So if we go back here to our, we've just sailed. We came there at the end of our first move. We're going to turn slightly. I don't want to go too far. I just want to go there. So then just, straighten out your wake marker. Then you can fire if there's something to fire at, or you could have fired before you turned. And then you do your second move, okay? And, again, you can start from the bow, but I just like to start from where the stern is, and often using the wake markers line as a gauge. And there's 5 right there. And then, again, here, I can also do another turn, and then level there. So that's a full battle sails move. 2 moves separated by a turn if you want, maybe even shooting at an opponent. Now on a full sail, you would go 1 additional move. So you go 5 forward after that last turn on the battle sails. You go forward another 5. However, if you go full sails, you cannot make a turn at the end of that 3rd move. Okay? Okay, so let's say you want to go from light sails to anchored, or because you're actually sailing into the wind, you failed your tack test, and you have to go to anchored, let's say from battle sails or something else. What you do is you remove the weight counter, you move forward 1 full move, because if you were moving in the last turn, you've got momentum, and you're going to move forward that full distance, and then you're going to stop, and now you're anchored. okay? And you can, by the fact that there is no wake marker present, that tells you the ship is anchored. Now, alternatively, you can actually, if you happen to have a little anchor marker, or maybe even use one of the anchors that come with your kit. Paint it up, a red or so, some bright color that you can tell, and just lay that down next to it. We often use these little plastic anchors to just visually show, because again, we don't use wake markers as much in our games, just to keep things simple. So that tells us it's anchored. Now, again, when you're anchored, you are still able to make a turn. So at the end of your turn, you can still make a turn. Okay, or at the end of your one move, you can make it. Now, if you happen to be anchored at the end of your last turn, and you wish to remain anchored, you can still turn once. You don't move at all. You just turn, and again, either direction, wherever you want. And then of course, then you can shoot, or of course you can shoot and then turn. Your choice. Now that's important. Being able to decide whether to shoot and turn or turn and shoot helps you, because then you're more likely to get your fire on a particular target. Okay, you can, for example, if you're lined up this way against a brig here, you can open fire, then turn, and then maybe your bow guns are pointed at something else. You can fire your bow guns. Okay, so that's how you go ahead and do those. But again, when you're anchored, you can always make a turn. Even though you're not moving forward, you can always make one turn. All right, let's talk about gunnery. Okay, you're gonna be wanting to shoot your opponent if you want to win. So let's take a look first. One concept you have to get your head around in naval combat on the age of sail is the different firing arcs that are available with the ship. We're going to start with the Santissima Trinidad, which has all 4 firing arcs, or 4 gun positions, right? And a gun position on the card is represented by the position of the gun. So there is a bow chaser position, a stern chaser position, a port broadside position, and a starboard broadside position. Okay, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4 gun positions. All right. Now a brig only has the one, because it just has the broadside. There's 2. Sorry, the starboard and port broadside. Frigate has the starboard and port broadside, as well as a bow chaser. Now, these arcs are very, very specific, and I put the 3 ships out here for a reason. I want to show you that the broadside is the size of the broadside arc is completely dependent upon the size of the ship. You'll notice the length of the Santissima Trinidad is pretty long. It spans from, I'll go ahead and shift this up to where the last cannon is on that line, and then the bow cannon, or not the bow cannon, but the forwardmost cannon is right here. So parallel lines perpendicular to the ship, this band is the firing arc of that broadside. So any ship that is anywhere in that area can be targeted. If the ship is like this one just outside, cannot be targeted. Same thing with the brig, too far forward, cannot be targeted by the broadside. So it's a very, very restrictive arc. Now, of course, we're going to set the frigate up same way. There's the last cannon, but look how much smaller its firing arc is, and the brig is even smaller than that. Matter of fact, it's essentially the width of that ruler, yardstick. So when you turn your ship to line up a broadside, your smaller ships are going to be more precise in how you line those shots up. All right. Now, regardless of the ship's size, all of them have the same firing arc front and back, and that is within the yellow arc here. So we'll go ahead and we'll put the frigate back here a bit, and this brig will be in arc here, but it will be out of arc if it was over here, okay, of the bow gun. Okay, so that's how that works. All right, so simple. Once you get your mind around it, very, very, very simple. But now let's talk about cannon. Different cannon at different ranges. So again, we'll focus on the Trinidad here. And we have the 3 different guns. Now, the large cannon, which is the stern chaser and both the ports, port and starboard broadside, as well as the bow chaser. These have a 20-inch range. The light cannons, which are on the broadsides only, are a 14-inch range, and the cannonades or carronades are actually only 8 inches. I mean, that's not very long. Okay, so it's much shorter. Now, so the first thing you do is you line up your shot, and then in order to actually shoot, you have to make sure you're in range. So then you go ahead and you measure if you're in range. Now, you can use a yardstick or a tape measure. All works really well. Here's an option though. You can take a yardstick and cut it down to, like a friend here did. It's 20-inch yardstick, or cut down to 20 inches, and he's got the 14-inch marked off, and you could actually do an 8-inch as well. So now that's a 20-inch. That's the cannon, heavy cannon range, light cannon range, and carronade range. It could all be on one stick if you want to do that. That's just a suggestion. That keeps it simple. If you want, you can get a small dowel rod, a thin dowel rod, but then do exactly the same thing at those. It's a little more convenient, possibly, to wield that around. All right. So those are the firing arcs, and that's the ranges for the different weapon types. All right. Now that you've chosen your target, you decide you're going to fire. What you need to do is determine what value on a 10-sider die you need to hit. So a 10-sider, you are going to need to roll a number or less on that D10 to actually do damage to the opponent's ship. All ships start with a 5 or less. Okay. Now there's a 2-hit chart with all the different penalties and bonuses on it. It's a pretty large chart, so I'm not going to put it on the screen because it'd be hard to read. But it takes into account how many gun positions you're firing, the range, the crew level, the speed of you or the target, and target size, and all the kind of cool stuff. So right now we have a situation where this frigate is firing. Here's its broadside. I set up the front cannon on this black line to illustrate kind of where the boundary, one boundary of the broadside is, and where the target ship is. Now, the first thing you're going to look for is the number of positions you fired during the turn. You can fire the first 2 positions, so like 2 broadsides or the stern chaser and the broadside, any 2 without penalty. But as soon as you fire a third at something that turn, you're -1 with that gun position. If you fire a 4th one after that, if you're lucky enough or unlucky enough that you have to do that, you're -2 on the 4th gun position. So that represents the fact that fewer cannons are able to keep up a sustained rate of fire given the number of the crew on board that are actually servicing the cannons with the shot and powder. So the next thing you look at is the range. Essentially, there's 2 range modifiers, and 10 inches is one of the marks. So we're going to go ahead and here's a 10-inch ruler. There it is, 10 inches at you measure from the hull to the hull. Now this is just a 1/4 inch further away, so this is long range, and it's going to be -2. So now I'm going to actually need, instead of a 5, I need a 3 to hit. I'll try to put that there so you can see. Now, if the target ship was within 3 inches, I'd be +2 to hit. Alright, so now we've assumed for the purpose of these training videos that both ships are going to be regular crews, or all ships are going to be regular. So there's no modifiers for that. But a veteran crew is +2, and an inexperienced is -2 to shooting, okay? Now, speed. If the shooting ship is anchored, it's +1. But if the shooting vessel is moving at full sails, it's -2. Now, we're assuming battle sails in all cases here, so no modifiers. Now, if the target vessel has moved more than 10 inches in its previous move, this turn or last, you are actually at -1 penalty to hit. Now here it's a brig, no special modifiers, it's not moving at full sail, it's just moving at battle sail, it's going to move 10 during its previous phase, so no modifiers. Now, the other one is size. The frigate is a medium ship, brig is small ship. So small ship is -1. So all of a sudden now, I need a 2 or less to hit. Okay? So we went so far from a 5 down to a 2. Now there's a last potential modifier, and this one has to do with whether, where the position is, what's called partially obscured. Remember, you have a very narrow firing arc, and you need to have more than half of the target ship in that arc. If this brig were just further forward of that black line, where less than half of that ship is in its firing arc, that would be considered to be partially obscured or a partial target. Okay. Now, sometimes you'll have a terrain in the way, obscuring part of your ship, more than half of the ship, that would be obscuring the target. That's an additional -2. So all of a sudden, I need a 0 to hit. I cannot hit, okay, because of all those modifiers. So you have to be very careful as you're lining up your shots. It is possible to not be able to hit at all. For simplicity, let's bring it in down here so we don't have a -2 penalty for being at long range. Now we're at -4, or we're at 4 or less. So if we were a partial target, it'd be a 2. But let's just go ahead and stick with the 4. Now you basically just roll your 4 dice, or it's going to be 4. It will be 4 dice. It's going to be 2 heavy, a light, and a carronade. So we'll roll the 2 heavies, 4 or less. There's 1 hit. Roll the light cannon. It's a 9 missed. Carronade is within 8 inches, so it's in range. And it rolled a 7, so it missed. So the only thing I hit with was one of the heavy cannons. So I would allocate damage accordingly. Now, the one thing that's interesting, no matter what 2 hit number you needed, I needed a 3 at one point, we changed it to 4. At one point it was a 2. No matter what, if you ever roll any of them as a 1, you roll a 1 to hit. Even if it's what you need to hit, that is a critical hit. And you'll do its additional damage. So let's kind of go through what damage do you do when you hit a ship? Okay, so again, we had heavy cannon, light cannon, and carronade. Now, the damage done by the gun is based on its size. And a heavy cannon does 2 damage for every hit it does. And 1 for a light cannon, every hit a light cannon makes. And 3 for every hit from a carronade. Now, we had a single heavy cannon hit, so we did 2 damage to the target ship. Okay, in that particular one. Alright, now, there's an additional thing that you need to consider, and if you are within 3 inches when you shoot, if you're within 3 inches, you double the damage. Okay, so that can be pretty devastating. So if we were within 3 inches of that brig, we hit with 1 cannon, 1 heavy cannon, that would have been 4 damage instead of just 2 damage. So you want to get close to not only increase your chances of hitting, which is +2, and more importantly, you're doubling the damage you actually dish out. So it becomes very, very important to get close. And now the reality is, of course, you get close, you can be heavily damaged too. But that's the way the combat worked in the day. Alright, let's talk about critical hits though. Now, critical hits doesn't matter what gun type you had. It matters that you rolled a 1. That's all that matters. Now, the first thing that you want to think about is, we're not going to talk about the aiming high or aiming at the hull. We're going to assume hull for this initial one. We're going to talk about aiming high later in the next, we'll call it advanced gunnery kind of course. But right now, we're assuming hull. For every critical hit you do, you're going to consult a critical hit table and you'll roll a d6. There are 6 possible results on that table. Something as simple as a quarterdeck hit, which affects basically your ability to act the next turn. A gun deck hit, which affects your ability to fire next turn. A rudder or steering hit. affects whether, if you can turn it all. A crew hit actually can affect certain things that happen during your turn because you're going to fail a skill test if it was a crew hit. Then it could be extra damage to the structure, so you take an additional D3 damage from that hit. So not only do you take all the damage from the hit, you take D3 more. And then finally, this is all on D6. On a roll of a 6, you get a fire on board. That's a vicious one. We'll talk about fire in at a different point, because we're not really going to want to get too deep in the fire rules. But just just on the face of it, the simple way of understanding fire, the first thing you do is you're going to use one of those, some of that fire wool that came with the kit, and just put it there on the ship, so that you know it's on fire. Happened to me a few times already in my game. But you're going to actually now also take damage. So as soon as it catches fire, it takes more damage. So, and it depends on the size. So if it's a brig, a small ship, or even a tiny ship, it's only going to take D3 damage. But a medium ship like this frigate is going to take D6 more damage. And a large or extra large, like any of your first, second, or third rates, or fourth rates even, those are going to take D10 damage, additional D10 damage. And that happens for every turn the ship stays on fire. And we'll talk about how do you put a fire out in a later video. So what I would suggest you do for the initial game is keep the rules simple. If you catch fire, just do the additional damage and assume it goes out after that, just to keep it simple, just for your first scenario. We'll talk about all the fire rules in the next lesson. Okay. Alright, so those are the basic rules, the very basic rules for playing Black Seas. But they're enough to get you started with playing the very first scenario in the book, which is a good training exercise. The goal of that is to deal out some damage and escape off the other side. So the reason we did not cover things like collisions is that in that scenario it's less likely to happen. You want to get close enough to do some damage to the enemy ship and then make it off safely to score more points. Okay. Alright, so hope that was enough to get you started. You feel like we've explained it well enough. Go ahead and share, like, subscribe, comment below, ask any questions you have. We'll address those in the comment section, and we'll also probably roll those into a future video release. So stay tuned. Let's head down to the docks and let's go out to the sea and see if we can stir up some action. All right, bye bye.